Hello everyone and welcome to the first Signs of Life online event from the neck up.
Thank you.
My name is Sarah Sasson. I'm the editor of this anthology collection, and joining us tonight we have some of our contributing authors. This is the first of a two-part series. Tonight we'll be discussing From the Neck Up, which means the stories that deal with neurological conditions, neurodiversity, mental illness, including self-harm and suicide, and cognitive decline. So I just would like to begin by introducing you to some of our writers, and they're going to let you know a bit about where they are today. So first up, we've got Rebecca Garnet Haris.
Hi. Yeah. Hi, I'm Rebecca and I'm in London, England.
Welcome. What time is it there?
It's 12 noon.
12 noon. I should say I'm in Sydney, Australia, and it's just gone 9 p.m. So yeah, you'll get an idea of everyone's different time zone. We have Al Campbell.
Hi. I'm in my room in Brisbane, Australia, same time zone as Sarah. So hello, I'm very happy to meet all of you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Isabella Mori.
Hi, yes, I'm Isabella and I'm calling from Vancouver, Canada, from the unceded traditional lands of the Indigenous people called Musqueam.
Thank you. Josie Byrne.
Hi, I'm Josie and I'm from England, a small village called Wigan, which is about 20 miles from Manchester, and it is 12 noon.
12 noon. Excellent. D.E.L.
Hi, I'm D.E.L. Good morning from Bakersfield, California. It is 4 in the morning.
Thank you for joining us. You had one of the tougher times. Emily Bourne, hello.
Hi, I'm Emily and I'm from England. I'm coming to you from my bedroom and it's 12 noon.
Thank you. Reinfred?
I'm Reinfred, coming to you from Gainesville, Florida in the USA. It is 7:04 in the morning and I'm sitting here in my office/garage.
Love it. Thank you. And Callum, hello.
G'day, I'm Callum. I'm here from Bunyip, Australia.
Thank you. Thanks for being another Australian. I feel like the English are well represented here, but you get a bit of a flavour. We had nearly 200 entries and it was really a global response. And so we're celebrating some of the writers tonight who were selected for publication. So we'll jump right into the questions. The format of the event is I have two questions for each writer and hopefully we'll generate the discussion. The first question generally relates to the story that is published in Signs of Life, which is available now. And the second question, I've tried to just broaden and speak more about the writerly life in general. So first up is Emily Bourne. Emily, in your work blog of a sick girl, the protagonist is struggling to live with and seek help for a number of chronic illnesses, including pain, fibromyalgia, and disordered eating. What are some of the challenges for a young person when an illness does not resolve quickly?
Yeah, I think it's devastating. As a young person, you're just realizing who you are and then suddenly it's getting taken away. You're becoming undone and there's not really anything you can do to stop it. For me, I'm completely different than I was before I was ill. I don't really function the same. I'm not the same type of person. And for a lot of young people, they don't get to finish their education. I didn't. And it's sad because I think your identity is there. That's where you've been essentially your whole life. So you're losing parts of yourself, things that you enjoyed doing and taking pride in. And you get ill and you simply can't do it anymore. You don't feel yourself, and the ability and importance of the things that you could do, you can't do them anymore. So I think the biggest challenge would be persevering, because it's not just your physical illness, it's the way it makes you feel too, that makes it feel almost impossible. You feel opened up like a shell, and it's raw, and it's brutal, and it's unfair. But at some point it will stop feeling that way, and you'll have to start rebuilding. But I think that's the hardest part.
And how did you find other young people responding? Because that's one thing I thought of when I read your pieces. A lot of young people have brushes with illness or accidents, but then they mend quickly. And what came through in your piece was just how protracted it was and how frustrating that was. So I'm interested in how other young people react.
Yeah, I have a few pen pals, and once I told her about the publication, she wrote me back and she said that my piece had really really struck home with her, because she has a chronic illness too. And just reading something that feels, I know for me, when I was looking up stuff online, especially about fibromyalgia, you can't find a lot of things about young people. And I know for them, it was that they had seen some of themselves in my story. And I think that's what's so lovely about it, hearing a young voice.
And I think another thing I really liked about your piece was it didn't necessarily, there was hope at the ending, but it wasn't all neatly tied off. And I think sometimes in writing, to finish a narrative, we like to have a happy ending or a neat ending, but that's not really reflective of reality. So yeah, I like that about your piece. The other question I had was, it made me wonder if you were a writer of a blog, are you a writer or a reader? And what role do you think blogging plays now in our contemporary life?
Okay. I'm a co-creator and writer at Rizenzine, which is an online platform for young people to have their voice heard. And that's where I first found my love for writing and my advocacy, and other people have found theirs. In terms of blogs that I read, I have a friend that's chronically ill that has a blog called sakarad.co.uk, and she writes about being ill as a young person. But I think I'd recommend it to anyone, no matter their age or if they're able-bodied or not. And in terms of blogs and contemporary life, I think that so many things they can be a blog these days, like social media, because people get to voice their own narrative, especially disabled people. They get to narrate their own experiences, especially when so many ableist narratives are being shared at the moment. For example, in the UK, on the BBC, there's been a documentary recently about illness fakers. And I think this anthology is especially good because you hear from people who are actually ill. And I think the narratives that we should be focusing on are from disabled people themselves. Because I'm sick of hearing the narrative that disabled people choose their lifestyle, or they can be blamed for the way that they are, especially when anybody can become disabled at any point.
So that idea of hearing from a true and authentic experience as opposed to someone's perception of what it's like.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you. I'll probably get you to email me the blog site you just mentioned so that I can put it up in the link as well. Thank you. And I know you've taken time out of your work day to be here, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, question for Lamina.
Hi, sorry. I disconnected earlier. That's why I couldn't introduce myself. I'm Callum from Indonesia. I'm Callum from Indonesia. I'm currently residing in Surabaya from my semi-bedroom. But let's say it's something.
And what time of day or night is it for you?
It's night actually. It's only I'm only 2 hours faster than Australia, so it's 6 p.m. right now. thankful.
So this lucky for you. Okay, in Transcendental Numbers, Herman's lover tries to keep his mind tethered to the world through the love of mathematics. I'm really curious what drew you to that idea.
I think honestly, the idea kind of from disparate things from my own life. My mother died of breast cancer when I was 14, and I think it impacted my wrote stories. Transcendental Numbers is a relatively old work of mine, conceived a year after her death, and I think I was unconscious of all the things my smarter friends cherished, like their intelligence, their artistry, and their passions, and wondering what would happen. They lost all of that, and they had nothing left but their bodies, their debilitating bodies, their dying selves. I was especially impacted by my high school math teacher, Mr. Daniel, who was a man who would finish several mathematics problems during his lunch, not because of his work, but because he found it fun. And I was wondering, like, what would happen. I was wondering how curious it is that humanity can kind of find meaning in such small details like numbers, and how happen if that meaning were to be taken away by some kind of like debilitating illness. So I think while I was writing Transcendental Numbers, I was definitely trying to find meaning in the people that I had lost in my own life, and I wanted to believe that they had lived lives to the fullest with the small things that they cherished the most.
Wow, that's so beautifully expressed. I have a really deep respect for people who understand mathematics at the level that I think Herman does. Yeah, but that I don't or never have. So I really liked that doorway. But I have to tell you, my sister, who's read the anthology, she loved your piece, and after she read it, she kept thinking, what would my thing be? Like, like if I was declining, what would be the thing that would tether me to the world? And then she's taking it to her book club, and they're all going to try and think of their one true thing that that they would cling to, that would anchor them. So I think it's really an interesting idea of what that might be for different people. And thanks for sharing as well your own experiences that I think often infuse our writing. I'm interested if you mostly write fiction or memoir, or do you kind of blend the two, and why? What is your preference?
I think this may sound kind of like weird. I think a lot of fiction ends up being memoirs for people who like to look at themselves in the mirror, if that makes sense. So like, I am a person who has relatively low self-esteem. I struggle with myself a lot, and that's why I end up using fiction as a way to kind of like try to discover myself or the people that I'm not. But what ends up happening is that even though I tend to write fiction, I also infuse myself within my own writing without realizing it. Transcendental Numbers, I wrote it when I was around 15 years old, and during that time I wanted to kind of separate myself completely from the work. But I am now 21, and after looking at the story again, I realized that I had put a lot of my own experiences and my memories and my emotions during the turbulent times of my mother's death in that piece, and it ended up being more of a memoir in a very kind of like mixed fashion. But yes, I do end up like writing more fiction than in that case. I hope one day I'll be able to be comfortable enough with myself to write something that truly speaks to my own experiences and not someone else's.
It's so interesting how your relationship to that piece is so deeply entwined with your relationship with your mother, and yet the central relationship isn't one of child and parent. But I just think it's really interesting. I find that in my own writing too, we do leave pieces of ourselves in our writing, and as you've expressed, I think sometimes that's a conscious thing, and sometimes it's quite unconscious. But I do think it comes through and makes the text richer. Well, thank you for your work and for being here. Moving to D.E.L. Microphone's on. So nice to finally see you face to face.
It's nice to see you too.
In Win a Date with John Mayer, a music lover develops psychosis while trying to see her artistic idol. What are the challenges about writing and conveying that kind of break with reality or in a psychotic episode?
So for me, when I wrote this piece, I had just came home from a residential treatment program. And so writing this, it was like, I had like the lens of like really like reflecting back on the beginning of my mental health journey. I feel like a lot of it was like memory recall, like correctly recalling events as they happen in chronological order. Sometimes that would become a little bit like a little blurry, but yeah, it was other than that, it's more of a rewarding experience.
So do you sometimes write to sort of make sense, to create a linear narrative, or try and piece together the puzzles of what happened?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I tried to do that for a piece of my own. After I had a difficult birth with my first child, and like you said, it all becomes really blurry and disjointed. And then I sat down to write it, but it actually came out in fragments, in sort of memory fragments. So I was impressed with your piece, how you managed. There is a very strong linear narrative, and it reads like a story, but at the same time you do get that insight about how it felt. And I have to say that it's probably the first piece I've read that really has made me understand what that kind of break feels like. So congratulations, because I just it's so vivid, and I imagine it's quite hard to get down on the page. I loved your piece, and one of the things I loved about it was about fandom. So how does being a fan enhance a person's life?
In short, I believe that it amplifies it.
So it makes the good times better?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Well, thank you again for being here and sharing your story.
Thank you so much.
All right. I've got Rebecca Garnet Haris. Hello. So in your story, Doctor's Appointment, it's a blisteringly honest account of mothering a child living with autism. What's the one thing about being a parent to a child with autism that you'd like more people to understand?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of focused on the word child in the question, Sarah, because my daughter's now 33, but so I'm sort of taking it in two parts. So when she was a child, and she was at infant junior school, she was treated a bit like a leper. So she displayed these strange tendencies, and she'd sort of be sat at the back of the class or sat at the back of the assembly room. And I remember an occasion where there was a school presentation and all the little children had to grab partners for this dance. Cassia wasn't going to, her name's Cassia, wasn't going to grab anybody. So she stood in the middle of the floor, and none of the teachers or formal adults joined in with her. So I had to get up and go and take her to the side. So that was back in the early 90s. So just thinking about then, I wish there had been some sort of school ideology about inclusiveness of any child with any disability, almost as part of the national curriculum, where we are taught about the differences in people and actively engaging those with differences in the classroom. Of course, that didn't happen. I don't know if that's happening now. I don't have young children anymore. It might be, but I don't know. So that'd be something to just look into. I think now, what I find most frustrating is when, for instance, to give an example, we go into a shop to buy a car for my daughter's flat apartment, and I say to the chap, she's got autism, so she will a little bit strangely to you. Oh, she's fine. There's nothing wrong with her. And then I went in to see him on my own, chatting back. I said, oh, she's okay. Actually, she's not. And I find this with other members of the family, where they say, oh, she's fine. She's actually not. And someone addresses that, I'm not sure.
So it's like instead of trying to understand the differences, people just want to put it in a box and sort of say everything's okay, or
they class it
it's
as
almost dismissive,
or what we perceive as normal, and that can be incredibly frustrating, because people with neurodiversity are incredibly interesting and have wonderful skills, and I don't think that's recognized. So by saying, oh, she's fine, well, she's fine in her neurodiversity, but she's not fine as you consider fine. So that can be somewhat frustrating, as in her adulthood as opposed to her childhood now, you know.
Yeah, and also maybe just a little bit of almost laziness on the other person's behalf. Like it's easier for them to go, oh, it's fine, rather than say, well, you know, how can I adapt, or, you know, in what way can I make this interaction better? Or
they might be a little bit embarrassed acknowledging that actually she is different. It's like when people get sick or have things, they go, oh, you know, people placate you, people use placations and everything, but sometimes it's far better to go, oh, really? How does that work out? How can I, you know, I think we could all be a bit more like that about anybody, you know, how can I help? How can I, you know, change my language, change my way of perception? So I think we all probably do it with lots of different situations in life, actually.
Yeah, interesting. So I'm not sure if this directly applies to your daughter or not, but what do you think are our responsibilities as writers if we write about people who may not be able to communicate their own stories in the same way, especially if we're publishing the work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very interesting question. I think in terms of neurodiversity, if you're writing non-fiction, I think you have consent from that person. If the person hasn't got capacity, should you really be writing a non-fiction piece? At the moment, I'm writing a fiction novel about an autistic child in 1950s America. It is kind of my daughter's voice, but as I write, I find it's much more than that. But equally, responsibility in fiction is something I looked at as my MA dissertation in my creative writing degree. I looked at autistic childhood voices. How do you write an authentic autistic childhood voice? And examining all the sort of contemporary literature on it, it was very much shown, and in academic texts it was commented on that when we write autistic fiction, it can be terribly stereotypical, as in Curious Incident of the Dog and the Night by Mark Haddon, mathematical savant ability, that sort of thing, a bit of male ideology in there. So it's something I, as I said, looked at as part of my dissertation. So I think that there is responsibility there not to put a stereotypical slant on it. And I also find in my analysis that if you were a parent or a sibling or a family relation, your fiction would be far more across the spectrum of autism as opposed to being stereotypical. If it was someone who just had an interest or maybe even worked with autistic people, it was far more stereotypical. So you could then argue, should writers be writing about something they have no experience of? I don't know. I think in the autistic world, I think the consensus is it needs to be looked at quite carefully and delved into, not becoming stereotypical. Curious Incident of the Dog and the Night sold thousands and thousands of copies, and it tended to be the benchmark of how we viewed autism, and it probably still is, which isn't ideal, really.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then it's that responsibility of writers and publishers to maintain the diversity that's out there, rather than say this is what this condition looks like. Yeah, fantastic answers. Thank you for your thoughtful responses. I'll just check. Okay, I have Reinfred next. Hello. Your work, The Shaking Man, explores the therapeutic relationship between a man with Parkinson's disease and his speech pathologist. And I know you work as a speech pathologist as well. What are some of the greatest challenges you've seen in dealing with these kinds of degenerative neurological disorders?
So one of the biggest challenges my patients deal with is understanding the benefits of my interventions and therapy, and also the limitations. So For my patients who are usually on the new end of their disorder, so very recent, they still are holding on to their previous lifestyle of total independence. So they think that whatever I have to offer, so whether it's swallowing therapy or cognitive therapy for memory, is going to completely bring them back to their prior level of functioning, and is going to completely undo the condition they have. And sometimes they, because they are so independent, they don't see that I can benefit them at all. They feel that they don't need me at all. And then my patients who are on the later stages of their disorder, what I find with them is because they realize they've had these challenges for so long, they feel that whatever I have to offer might not benefit them. So what ends up happening is they ask, what's the point? I'm degenerating. I'm never going to get back to normal. It's just going to get worse from here. So, what's the use of trying any of this stuff?
So almost like you need to tailor your sessions, almost engaging where they are. Do you think there's an aspect of denial in those early interventions where denial the progressive nature of the disease, or they're just not sure what's happening?
There can be denial, and also what I find is so mostly I work with older adults in residential care facilities, so nursing homes and the sort. And sometimes communication is not the best from caregivers and medical professionals to the patient. I'm not sure whether it's, and also from family members. And because, especially for family members, they're going through the grieving stages themselves, because it can be quite a traumatic piece of news to receive that your family member is going through a degenerative process. So they don't want to be that person that gives bad news to their family and tell them that, and be realistic with them and tell them that, you might have to change your lifestyle a little bit. So part of it is the denial, and also part of it is the patient not fully understanding what this condition is about, because the people who have the knowledge and information to educate them haven't done their due diligence.
I just have to say I had so much positive feedback on your writing. It's got a beautiful melodic, lyrical quality, almost like poetry. So I just wanted to pass that on to you because I hadn't had the chance yet. But so I understand you still work as a speech pathologist, but you're also a writer and a visual artist. Can you share with us some of the other creative projects that you're currently working on or are excited about?
Yeah, I am embarrassingly creatively busy right now. So that's a good problem to have. On the writing end, adding more pieces to, speech therapy related creative writing, so health humanities stuff. Right now I'm working on traumatic brain injury. So I'm still trying to plot it, so I don't want to divulge too much information because I don't know what I'm going to really write about it yet, but that's what it's going to be about, traumatic brain injury. And I'm also working on my second general poetry collection. And then for visual arts, I'm working on a series right now, playing and experimenting with patterning. And then the other creative thing I'm doing is I'm just in the initial stages of music. So percussion and generally Afro-inspired sounds.
Well, a man of many talents. So we look forward to watching your career as it evolves. I have Josie Byrne up next. Hello. Josie, your story, Anne, is such a powerful depiction of a person trying to prevent their sister from both self-harm and suicide. Do you think the general community's understanding and empathy towards these issues is increasing?
Yes, I really do. I think the system has changed very much in the 20 years since Anne died. There's a greater understanding of mental health problems, especially in the workplace, that has thankfully taken place. It's a lot more open now and acceptable, and it is talked about a lot more. And I also think that the internet and social media, you know, in blogs and the information that is out there has been a great help. I don't think that the situation that Anne was under 20 years ago, where she was sent home from a psychiatric hospital after 2 months possibly, without any support whatsoever, would happen now. I do know that there is a lot of support in the community now with a mental health team that does look after patients who are discharged. But I do think that because of this more awareness, the system has got more and more stretched, and mistakes, really bad mistakes, are still being made. And people are still saying we must learn from our mistakes. And sometimes you wonder, yeah, but you're not, because the same mistakes are being made. But I do think it's taken a long time, but it is progressing, and it has.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I feel like even in my lifetime, I remember growing up, people talked an awful lot about people having nervous breakdowns. That was just the term that was used. And I remember as a child thinking, like, what does that mean? And I kind of imagined just our neurons kind of dissolving. But yeah, I agree with you. I think there's so much more dialogue and language. You know, people know about depression and bipolar disorder, and you know, they're actually using the correct terms. But yeah, I do wonder, I mean, I think your piece is so powerful, and there's something about you know, suicide and suicide awareness. You know, it's still so shocking every time it happens, and I still think there's more work to destigmatize that and to support the families as well. When you talk about the mistakes, do you mean people being discharged without the appropriate follow-up care? Is that what you're talking about, the mistakes?
No, I don't think that still goes ahead. I think mistakes are made in probably discharging people too early. The support's there, and then when the patient starts to get a little better, I mean, naturally the support does fade away. But I do think people that suffer from depression, they're very clever people in that they can fool people. They can appear absolutely fine, wonderful, enjoying life, but they're acting, they're pretending. And I think with more constant support, more like daily support, which is difficult, I know, that it would be picked up that this person is not what she seems. So it's all down to resources, Sarah, and it's all down to money and national health and you know, cutting here and cutting there. And unfortunately, I think mental health is a section where they think they can cut back.
Yeah, and as you say, there's such a demand, and I know both England and Australia have this sort of socialized model of health where, you know, it comes mostly is in through the public system, and like you say, we need more resources. It's for the extent of the problem as well. So I know you work as a playwright. So I wondered, because sections of it do read like a play, I was wondering if it was part of a performance piece, or is it linked to any way to a piece for theatre?
Well, actually, this is the first time in 20 years that I have written about my experience and about Anne. I've never ever put it on paper. I've never thought about writing about it. Perhaps it's just a mental block that I thought I couldn't write about it. So thank you for the opportunity, Sarah. I haven't directly made Anne a performance piece, as I would feel like I was betraying Anne and her illness, because Anne was such a quiet, reserved person. And I know that she would hate to think that somebody was on a stage talking about her art, so I haven't gone down that route. Also, out of respect for Anne's husband and Anne's children, I just wouldn't like them to think that I was not like profiteering, that's not the right word, but they're very private people as well, so I haven't gone down that route. And I also think that performance pieces about suicide are very, very powerful and very, very upsetting. I have seen a couple myself, and I would be very aware of who was in the audience and what effect that my piece about suicide, my performance piece, would have on that person, because it could easily tip that person over. So I haven't gone down that route. However, I do think that my experience and when I'm writing my plays and I'm building my characters, that Anne is there somewhere in a little tiny form.
That's beautiful, and I'm so honoured that when you saw the call out for Signs of Life, that you felt that it was an appropriate place to share this story, because yeah, I think it is such an important piece, and I'm so glad that you were able to put it into the world in a way that, as you say, fits with Anne and her family's wishes, as a quiet person, and so I'm so thankful that you did that. So thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll move to Isabella Mori. Hello. In your work, Purgatory, we follow the character Hans's journey of recovering from a psychiatric illness, specifically as he approaches discharge from an inpatient psychiatric unit back into the community. What were you exploring in writing about this liminal time?
Yeah, thank you. What an interesting question. So there were two things that converged. I was at the time working in a psychiatric hospital. I was part of a bigger hospital, and one of those older hospitals that kind of got stuck. They built one building and then they built another building, but they don't quite match, and it was like this hodgepodge of buildings, and underneath they were connected to a tunnel. And that tunnel was spooky. Really, it's you could do some horror movies in there. So every time I walked through that tunnel, I was just fascinated by that place. And then at that time, I also took a course in depth psychology. And at the end of the course, we were supposed to write a story about a myth that connects to present day life that we have experienced. So I kind of, so immediately that tunnel and the idea of the underworld came together for me. And that kind of, morphed into Virgil's idea of the purgatory. And so it naturally what came together was the experience of so many people I had seen in our psychiatric department, who also went through their own purgatory, and some came out like Hans, and things got better for them, and others didn't. So yeah, that's the background of that, is the idea of this person who has just had a psychotic break, and who is a little bit better now, and they kind of make their way through these tunnels out into the rest of the world again.
I'm so interested to know that the building is real, because the first time I read Purgatory, it's such an outstanding opening with this description of this building that's almost put together by patchwork. And, I'm never sure what's truth and what's fiction, but it's a brilliant opening. So I'm really interested to learn that it's true. Yeah, and I think what I liked about your piece, I also spent some time working in an inpatient sort of detox and psychiatric unit, and they are kind of worlds within the world. And so I really liked your piece. You know, it's one thing to recover to the point of not needing to be there, but I also felt that tension building as Hans was going to pop out in and face the challenges of society at large as well, because they're quite controlled environments, the inpatient unit. So yeah, I really enjoyed that tension. I see you a little bit on Twitter, where I hang out as well. And I know one time you mentioned you're interested in this idea of narrative medicine. So I just wanted to ask, what do you think stories and medicine have in common, or why do you think they inform each other?
Yeah, at that point, I think I was still kind of flirting with the idea of getting a PhD in narrative medicine. I've given up on that, thankfully, and instead I've written a book. But the idea of narrative medicine still really interests me. When a person goes to see some sort of medical professional, I mean, they don't go there and say, I have breast cancer, let's schedule the surgery. It doesn't work that way. It's, you know, they tell a story about, like, there's this weird thing and it's kind of like a lump or maybe like a little pea, and is it breast cancer, and is it like my mother's breast cancer and she had died this horrible death, is it going to be like that for me? I mean, there's a whole story around that. And so this is how people connect with medical professionals is through story. And story is such an important part of who we are as human beings. And so we bring these stories to the medical professional, and of course, you know, we expect that it is met the way a story is typically met. So with empathy or surprise or questions, or tears or laughter, but you know, there's a certain kind of script, almost like how we're supposed to react to stories. And then often what happens in that first encounter is that the medical professional, because, you know, usually because they're pressed for time, they don't respond in that script form. I mean, they'll say, okay, you know, okay, let's order a test. And that can be really disruptive, especially when the story is like so deep. And it can feel like, you know, because one of the worst things that we can happen when we tell a story is that people get bored or indifferent. And that's often kind of what I think what we take from a response like, okay, let's order a test. It's like, okay, you know, the person doesn't want to engage with my story. They're not interested. I don't mean anything to them. And I think that's the beauty of narrative medicine, is to recognize that a story needs to be excuse me, received in a certain way, and that also, like, the human thing again is that a story is often met with story. And so that I think it's important that the medical professional be aware of their own stories. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. What a fantastic answer. I think I want to do a PhD in narrative medicine now. No, it's funny, at working as a physician, I mean, there's so many different types of doctors, but I feel like so much of my life in the hospital is listening and receiving the stories. But I also hear your point, because I think what happens is then we have to interpret the story both as a text, but in the context of everything we know about human disease and the test results. And then I think often in the next visit, you know, then it's the medical professional telling their story back. And sometimes the two stories meet and there's agreement, but often, you know, there's a disconnect, and, you know, sometimes, you know, they don't accept each other's stories. Yeah, it's really interesting. you know, and then often we write letters to other colleagues, and again, we're telling stories. So I do feel that this idea of narrative medicine, I mean, I'm very drawn to it, obviously, because of the anthology, but I do think it's a rich vein to be tapped, and we learn so much about ourselves, as human beings through. And I think medicine is full of stories, and they generally enlighten us about the human condition and in all its diversity. Thank you. I don't want to run out of time, so I'm going to have to move to Callum Methven. Hello. In year 68, you explore the relationship between the protagonist and his nan, who lives with dementia. In what ways do you find the grandchild-grandparent relationship distinct and special?
So the piece is, I mean, essentially creative non-fiction. It's just based on my experience with me nan as she passed away. I guess the parent-child relationship is really, because it's such a close bond, it's so close up. But when you're that close up, you can't always see everything. You know, a parent knows everything about their child, but they also, in a certain sense, know nothing. A grandparent, well, at least in my case, they've never seemed to need to understand. They just were, it was just love, you know. And I'll also say there's something in that old young dynamic, something contradictory. When you're a kid, well, at least in most cases, you know, you meet your grandparents there at the end, there towards, you know, their later years, they've had a lifetime of experience, and you're standing up, you know, you know nothing. You're just, your future is just this endless list of questions, and they are the people who are going to have the answers, or at least an inkling as to what comes next.
Yeah, it's funny. I think a lot of parents, I know with my mum in particular, I'm shocked at how our relationship is so different to her relationship with my children. And it's like you say, I think the parents, they have all this responsibility and the, you know, all the day-to-day grind of it all. And then, you know, the grandparent comes in and, yeah, like you said, they just can just, they're free of all those responsibilities. And it can be quite this beautiful relationship of sharing knowledge and love that is less stressed than the parent-child relationship. I wanted to say I had a huge number of, so many of the submissions dealt with dementia and cognitive decline. I could have done a whole anthology just on memory loss. So it was really hard there were just a few pieces, and yours and Callum as well, that sort of had to carry the weight of all of them. And yeah, the writing's really beautiful, and I really liked how there were just so many different relationships that were affected by the nan's dementia. So you're sort of starting out on your writing career. What's the best advice you've been given as a writer, or what advice would you give other writers who are starting out?
The best advice I ever got was from one of my honours supervisors, John Hawke at Monash University. He was, because most of what I write is actually poetry, and he was, you know, I was trying on a lot of different voices. You know, you just read a lot of different poetry, you try and write like those poets and that sort of thing, and you know, try and find out what you actually sound like. And he said the best stuff that I submitted to him was what sounded most like me. Mm-hmm. He said, you know, if Les Murray can be the Bard of Bunya, you should be the Bard of Bunyip. So that was good. That was good advice. You know, if you, in terms of finding your voice, and
finding your true, authentic voice and writing from that place.
Yeah. In terms of advice for other writers, I think there's a lot of pressure to treat creative endeavors and pursuits as leisure, when it's, you know, it's enjoyable, that's why we do it, but it's also a lot of labor. There is labor to it. You know, you got to put in basically all of yourself. So I was about maybe a few months ago when I sort of admitted to myself that I was a writer after about 10 years of writing. So I think just, yeah, call yourself a writer, own it and do it. Let yourself do it and don't feel guilty about it, because it's, you know, just because it's not productive doesn't mean it's not worth doing.
Fantastic advice. Can I just ask, Bunyip, it's such a, is your town where that word comes from in Australian?
It's a lot of the, I know it's a word from a lot of the Kulin nations. Bunyip, the town, is on Bunurong country. Just above this, what used to be a big old swamp that was drained in early settlement. But yeah, so I think it's like a Koori, or I don't know, Koori word or something. It's a lot of Aboriginal nations have similar sounding words for the same deity.
Yeah.
Sorry.
There's sort of just for the non-Australian participants, there's Bunyip is sort of like this creature, part of sort of Indigenous cultures, and it's the town where Callum is residing as well. So just, it was interesting for me to learn more about where you're from and where the word comes from. Okay, finally, we've got Al Campbell. Hello.
Hi.
In your story, Does He Feel Warm? A mother tries to get help for her son who lives with disability and is also non-verbal. And then the child deteriorates quickly with a condition that's not readily diagnosed. What are some of the biggest shortcomings of our public health system for people with a disability? And what can doctors and other health professionals do better?
Well, actually, just having listened to everyone's, like Josie's story, her sister Anne, and how she does feel that we've made some advances with, how we perceive and receive the stories from about mental health, makes me think, gee, will we get there? Will we get there with disability? Will we get there with the very disabled, with the very very autistic? I hope so, but we are a long, long way from there. And as it's already been alluded to, it all comes down to money, doesn't it? It all comes down to resources. Because we need to stop being responded to and accommodated. They need to start preparing for us from the blueprint, from the budget level, preparing for us, because we're here. We're not going to not be here. And that isn't happening because, just doing something because it's the right thing to do just isn't seen as a dividend.
Also, it's just, it's so frustrating because it's a reality of life. Like, there is always going to be people living with disability. So we may as well, why don't we accommodate them, as you say, from the get-go, rather than being surprised by it.
That's right. And this pandemic has just amplified that all over again. I mean, I know it's a pandemic and everything's being dealt with on the run, but, once again, we are left behind and not considered, and,
And I think the stories, I know you're far more acutely aware than I am, but the stories are starting to come out now in Australia. So we had these priority lists of who needed to be vaccinated first, and they were like the 1A group, which included First Nations people and people living with disability, and it was all in the plan. But the actual reality of how, there was actually no plan with how to facilitate that or make sure the vaccines were getting into people's arms. And Al and I have talked about, some regions required people to have mobile phones or email addresses, which can be completely irrelevant to some people living with disability. So really, so long-held frustrations have been brought to the fore again by the current pandemic. And so given that the whole system stretched anyway, and and there's never enough money, but what are some simple things that doctors and other health professionals can do better just on a daily basis?
Well, I think that also ties into Isabella's and the discussion you had with Isabella about the stories is, you know, every doctor you ever meet who's treated one person in a wheelchair feels that they've got it nailed, and they've dealt with one person with autism. Well, they're over it, you know. I mean, they're you know, good to go. I don't need to hear anything from you because I've got this sorted. And I had that just recently where they tried to give my son a swab, a nasal swab in hospital. And I said, look, it's not going to happen. And they were like, sister, we got this covered. And they're wonderful nurses, 6 wonderful nurses. I know them on the infusion ward. They know us. We all friends. And I stood there and thought, sister, you so don't got this covered. And of course, my son basically became Chuck Norris, and they were like Morris dancers, and it was over before it even started. And I couldn't tell them, you know, don't bother. It's just going to be awfully unpleasant. But there you go. So, you know, it doesn't matter how much of your story there is. It's sort of assumed that they know better and they've heard it before and they've got it covered. So, you know, it's very different.
One of the very best physicians who was involved in training us, I remember, said, you know, always, you know, the patient and the patient's families are actually the experts in their condition, you know, and that's something that, you know, I tried to remember, but, and especially it was sort of in the context of rarer diseases, but I think it can be for individual disabilities. I think that's what you're saying is trust the patient and the patient's family. They know more about it. Chances are they know about it. Yeah. All right. Useful advice. All right. Now, so the story in the anthology is actually an extract from your new novel, The Keepers. And I was so lucky to
look at you.
This is my advanced reader copy, but don't worry. And I printed out the new cover.
Aren't you lovely? Thank you.
Everyone can watch out for it. So it's out with University of Queensland Press in February. How is the art of short story writing different to novel writing? And do you use short fiction as a training ground for larger pieces?
Just on the size of that manuscript, I couldn't make the printer agree to do double side. So
I felt super important reading it. It's like a PhD here.
The printer said, no, one side only. So I said, okay. No, and look, I don't think I'm really very qualified to answer this, Sarah, because as you probably know, I've written 2 short stories and 1 novel my whole life. That's it. I'm like Callum, I'm just starting, except there's, you know, 3 decades between us. But I think short stories are an art form unto themselves, and I'm so in awe of writers who can effortlessly slide between one and the other. I mean, there's many of them that do. I don't think I'm one of them, and I don't think sort of short stories are going to be in my future. A lot of that's a time thing too, you know, with my caring responsibilities and 2 boys. I've got to carve out that little bit of time in the morning, and so that's just got to be on the novel. I'm just not dexterous enough in my brain to sort of go, oh yeah, this another short no.
So you see yourself as a novel. You see yourself as a novelist, and why though? Do you think you just like the long form to explore more ideas, or you need more space?
Yep, take 100,000 words to get to a point, Sarah. No, it's I don't know. It's what I do before every single writing session is I do sit down and read a short story first, or some poetry, because, you know, everything's off the table with poetry in short form. I mean, everything. It's so playful, it's inventive, it's bold, it's daring. You can do everything. And I love that. And, you know, I'm a bit of a, well, I like to throw it all out there on the page as well. And I kind of feel like that's a creative limbering up. You know what I mean? So while I don't feel like I'm terribly good at writing short stories, I'm really grateful to the people who do, because I get to read them and they sort of, for me, I think I've learned a lot from them, because I don't like those sorts of novels where I know what the story is you're trying to tell me, and I can see exactly how you're going to tell it to me. I'm out pretty much with books. I'm a bit fussy like that. Whereas in short stories, you're kept on your toes, aren't you? So there's ambiguity and there's all that kind of thing that's permissible in a short story.
So you use it more as inspiration to sort of.
Yeah, I do. And I just find it very, it is. It's like limbering up. It's like, it's sort of, and I write in scenes, I write in Scrivener, which every publisher I've learned will say, oh, and that gives a writer bad habits. Oh, well, I'm a bad habit writer then, but I tend to write in little scenes, little snatches and little, and hope that they all come together. I can stitch them together in some way. So maybe there's a little bit of element of the short story to this scene by scene way that I write, I guess. I wish I was one of those writers that started at page 1 and finished at page 300, but I'm not, and I don't think I ever will be. But
I'm not sure those writers exist. I don't think that's a true story.
Really? Is that right? Okay, well, that's good. I feel better.
But I do think, or 2 comments. I do think the art of the short story, as you say, I actually think it's got to be one of the hardest forms. I've read Jeffrey Janidi's Fresh Complaints, or you just recommended another one to me. Was it
Joy Williams?
Yes,
Joy Williams.
Yeah. What is it?
The Visiting Privilege.
Yes, I just received that. So, but
a
writer who can really nail a short story, I do. I think it's one of the hardest forms. The characterization and the tension, and then usually there's a sting in the tail at the end. But I will say, you say you've only published 3 things, but the reality is, they've all been published. So you've got The Signs of Life, there's another exit in Overland, and then the book coming out in February. So I think you're well and truly emerged. I hate to break it to you. But I have to say the extracts you pulled out of the book, they did work as standalone stories, and I just thought that's interesting. It's an interesting way of putting your work out there and editing it, I guess, because I'd read both the short stories independently, and I was interested to see how they fit back together in the book, because they were quite different. But they totally settled in, and they didn't have rough edges or anything at all, so they worked.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think I want to finish before Zoom ends this for me, but I just wanted to finish by saying thank you for being here, and thank you again for the work that you submitted to the anthology. I think you're all exceptional writers, and more importantly, I think you're writing about things that really matter. So I do really look forward to watching your careers as they go on, and I think I follow most of you where I can find you across social media platforms, but please keep in touch, and I do hope, I wish you all the very best with your writing careers, and I hope to read lots more from you in the future.
You too, Sarah.
Thank you.
So, thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Yes.
Bye.